listener production.
Hi, I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. Welcome to this episode of The Briefing. Do you think we should be locking up 10-year-olds? What about making teenage offenders serve adult-length sentences? Those are just a couple of the youth crime policies taken to recent elections in Queensland and the Northern Territory by their respective Liberal parties, and both won on a platform promising to be tough on kid criminals. Stories of young teenagers stealing cars, assaulting people and shoplifting have been heavily featured in the media over the last couple of years. Victims of these crimes have expressed anger and frustration at the lack of action by lawmakers, and that has driven policies like we're seeing in Queensland and the NT. But do the stats actually back up the view that youth crime is surging across the nation? And is locking up kids the way to deal with a perceived increase in juvenile offenders? Joining me now to talk about the issue is Dr. Joel McGregor. He's a lecturer in criminology at Swinburne University, and he has direct involvement in policy and programs to do with youth crime. Doctor, welcome to The Briefing. Thanks for your time today. I want to start in Queensland. The LNP just over the weekend won an election on this platform of jailing youth offenders for adult-length sentences. Youth crime has been a huge issue in the state, but do the stats reflect this tough-on-crime attitude?
Yeah, so it's really hard to make sense of the stats sometimes when you're getting kind of media sensationalisation around what's going on, politicians trying to plug a particular angle of the stats. But what we can see is that youth crime is going down, but the rate of reoffence is going up. So what we should be doing is really trying to target young people who are persistent offenders.
What about in the Northern Territory? We've seen the same thing. The country Liberals just a couple of months ago won on a platform of lowering the criminal age of responsibility to 10, and this is only just a couple of years after they lifted it to 12. What's the picture in the Territory when it comes to youth crime? Do you think that's a fair reaction?
Look, I think lowering the age of criminal responsibility to 10 in any state is going to be really detrimental to young people, and particularly around disadvantaged young people, because we know that these kind of tough on crime policies particularly disadvantage, for example, in the Northern Territory, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people.
I think the issue with this that I've seen is that the victims are very real people. They exist. They are sharing their stories. There was a really well-publicised case in Queensland of a grandmother being stabbed to death at a shopping centre, and her family has really taken it upon themselves to speak out and do media interviews and make the issue known. I guess the question is, how do politicians balance the needs of the victims with the needs of youth offenders?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question, and we can never deny the real experience of victims. Because I do majority of my work with young people who offend, what I would say is that we actually need to also consider what's going on in their lives, because young people who offend are coming from generally very disadvantaged backgrounds. Sometimes there is intergenerational offending there. And so I understand the victims are upset. But in order to address what's going on with youth crime, we need to consider what is actually going on behind those young people and what's led them to those offending behaviours.
Yeah, so your work has put you in touch with young offenders. Tell me about the sort of kids that are getting involved in crime. Where are they coming from? What's their attitude to, the community in general? Have they had negative experiences? Is it really hard to kind of pigeonhole them? Are they all different sorts of kids? Give us a little bit of an insight.
Look, I think it's really hard to pigeonhole young people as far as, one group of people that has the same circumstances. I know from the research work that I have done, some young people tell me that committing crime is normal to them, and that's probably the most common experience, is that they've grown up with it, and so it's not necessarily something that they see as different. And I was doing an interview with a young person a month or so ago now, and it was really enlightening in that he was saying, now that I understand what I've done, I wish that intervention had have happened earlier, so I knew what was going on. I knew what I was doing, and I knew what I was doing was wrong. So really hard to pigeonhole young people, but there are common factors such as disadvantage, racial issues, those kind of things.
What role is social media playing? Because we've seen a couple of states introduce the idea of, posting and boasting when it comes to TikTok or Instagram. The idea that these kids are seeing other people who are their age going out and stealing a car, filming it, putting it up on TikTok, joyriding, and then they're wanting to essentially copy that and do the same thing, upload it to TikTok. Can we say that social media is kind of influencing young people in their decision to commit a crime?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the hard thing about social media and young people's use of social media is that it is very complex. Obviously, young people, what we know is that their brains are still developing. And so, this is another reason for not lowering the age of criminal responsibility to 10. But they often are at a stage of development where they can't fully comprehend their actions or fully comprehend what they're doing. So I would hate to make a straight line to say that young people are watching crimes happen on TikTok and then they're doing them themselves, but it might be that young people can't really understand the implications of their actions.
I want to ask about the media and also politicians and the role that both have in, I suppose, spreading the idea that youth crime is spiking and that it's an explosion and that it's out of control. How much responsibility should we be putting on politicians and the media to monitor the way they speak about these things so as not to fan the flames of, hate or even hysteria?
Yeah, look, there should be a huge responsibility put on politicians and the media. What we've seen lately in Queensland and Northern Territory is that these tough on crime policies become front and centre during elections, and they appeal to voters because it is something that people can see that is happening. It seems like a fast solution to a problem that is being sensationalised by media coverage. And the media and politicians really shape public opinion around youth crime. And if they're showing or saying that more punitive measures work, then the public are going to believe that. And they might work in the short term. Lowering the age of criminal responsibility to 10 will mean that there are more arrests of young people, but it's not addressing the long-term behaviours that we need to see addressed for young people to stop committing crimes.
Is that evidence-based, that position that you've just taken? Because I was going to ask the question that, as much as politicians need to make sure that they're not fanning the flames of hysteria, people have voted for the country Liberal Party in the Northern Territory and the Liberal National Party in Queensland. And crime and youth crime was a huge platform that they campaigned on. So you have to kind of look at it and go, well, people must want these policies. Is there any sort of proof that things like lowering the criminal age of responsibility, mandatory sentences, tougher enforcement, is there any proof that that does work in the long term in stamping out, recidivism in young criminals?
Yeah, so what I would say is one of the most well-known theories within criminology is the age crime curve. And so that means that often young people will be at the height of their offending during early to late adolescence, and then they naturally drop off from criminal behaviour. So if we are criminalising young people too early, we are potentially leading them to a lifelong criminal behaviour. So they're not petering out or stopping crime naturally as they would, but rather they're learning the behaviours to become persistent offenders.
Look, what might work better than the approaches of these two parties? And I'm using Queensland and the Northern Territory as examples because, we've seen these state elections play out and it's worked for them, campaigning on youth crime. So what might work aside from taking that tougher, more judicial system-focused approach?
So what we know works is rehabilitation measures. Now, what the problem with that is that it takes a lot of time and it isn't particularly cost effective as putting young people into detention centres. And so the general public, I would argue, want to see quick, fast action, which is why tough on crime measures work. But what we know is that we need to look at the underlying behaviours of young people and why they are committing crimes and addressing those behaviours. But that takes time and it takes money.
What would you say to people who would say that they've committed a crime, they don't deserve leniency?
Yeah, look, I would say think about who you want to be your next door neighbour. Eventually, all young people have to be released from youth justice. So do you want someone who is well integrated into society, or do you want someone who has learned criminal behaviours because they have been in youth justice centres? So think about who you want to be a neighbour, who you want to be your kids' friends.
Dr. Joel McGregor, thank you so much for your time today. We do appreciate you sharing your insights with us.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
That was Dr. Joel McGregor, a lecturer in criminology from Swinburne University, speaking with me there. And thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That is all for now. A reminder, full eps of our weekend briefing chats go up on YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom to see them. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, give it a like, and maybe even comment and tell us how much you loved it. You can also catch up with our other video content on TikTok at Listener Newsroom. And of course, we are on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. And finally, before you go, if you liked this ep or got something out of it, why not share it with someone you think might enjoy it too? It's a really big help for us. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. Catch you next time.